Hi, and thank you for tuning in to a new episode about the Japanese STF uniforms and unique airsoft. Before I begin, I want to thank many people who have subscribed in the last few weeks to my channel. I really want to thank you for that, and I really see that in the comment sections down below in some videos I have rewatched. I see that many people like the video, even have comments for a new video, and even have provided me with new information. Even they also disliked some content. New videos later on in the late this year. We will not use some examples for now, but in this video this topic is a little bit controversial because that are people I have favorite about this and this favorite for people. So I try to neutral is possible, but most of the time I disagree with many things what has happened in the last 50 years, being the beginning of the Cold War. So without further ado, please hit the bell notification button, subscribe to this channel, and hit the bell notification button. Like this video with your friends and family. So without further ado, let's start this video. As we all know to this day that we use in the Cold War the 7.62 by 51mm as NATO standard cartridge until the 1990s, where everyone around the world started to standardizing around the 5.56 assault rifle cartridge for the M16 or other variations. But even after World War II, or even during World War II, there were many countries already looking at developing their own small arms of assault rifle. Germany manufactured around 500,000 Sturmgewehrs in the small caliber 7.92 by 33 Kurz cartridge. It did not have much impact on the battlefield to surrender, but it did open the way for new waves of manufacturing of weapons programs. The Belgians and the British went with their own separate ways, but they did share the cartridge capacity and what cartridge they want to like. The Belgians went to Fn Fal production and they first started with the Kurz cartridge from the Sturmgewehr, the 7.92. It was a good cartridge, but there were some issues with it, so they decided to adapt the 280 from the British EM2 prototype. The cartridge was very good, and the EM2 pop-up design that was developed by the British was also very good. Both weapons were shared by the countries and tested in the field. It was really impressive for many people around it. And the Americans, under guidance under Colonel René Suttler, villain in this video, he also has sent his own weapons design and his own cartridge. The T-25, also known later on as the M14 battle rifle, the Americans, and the 7.62 that what came in. The Americans also were getting some EM2 versions and the Fn Fal in 280. And the high command and soldiers were really impressed with it. But René Suttler, no, it was totally inadequate. He wanted to make an American design, an American-made version of his own design and his own cartridge. He wanted to try to make his own legacy. So he ignored all experts and all information about the EM2 and the Fn Fal in 280. The 280 is highly controllability. The height rate of fire is also in very good mission. The reliability is very good, and it is much more modernized compared to the M14. You can, if you see later on in future, that the G3, for example, and the Fn Fal was upgraded constantly. The M14 sees still combat service while only as a designated sniper rifle. But back in the 1940s, early 1950s, there was still programming around what is the best cartridge and what's the best rifle for all of NATO. Then the Korean War breaks out. The UN forces on the guidance of the USA forces fighting off the North Korean forces, drove them back all the way to till the borders with communist China. But that never happened. China invaded, helped the North Korean forces to push back the invaders, they are also called, and they were using human wave assault tactics. Most of them were armed with World II leftovers weapons. Some were captured eventually from dead soldiers or prisoners of war. But the most common weapon was the submachine gun. With the human wave tactic from the Chinese, they managed to give many firepower as possible compared to a UN soldier who was mainly equipped with a full-height rifle cartridge. And most of them were equipped with bolt-action rifles, like the Lee Enfield, for example, some Mauser designs. The M1 Garand was only for South Korean forces and the United States forces, so far I know. Some forces were having the M1 Garand or the carbine version, but they did not have enough firepower. So after the Korean War, the British really want to use the EM2 in their main battle rifle. The Belgians went the same way with the Fn Fal. It was a good rifle, and that cartridge I was using, it was good for the design, good controllability, firepower, and a firing range of distance around 500 to 600 meters. But the Americans wanted it, especially René Suttler, a battle rifle with one shot, one kill, beyond 600 meters. And the weapons from the British and Belgians were not designed for that. So they compromised. The Americans went with the Fn Fal adoption, and Western Europe will go with the Fn Fal. No, I mean with the 7.62 by 51mm as the Fn Fal main battle rifle. Unfortunately, the Americans did break their promises and went with the M14 rifle, and the rest of the world for like coming 10 years were stuck with the 7.62. It was a totally inadequate cartridge. If you want to defend a position and you look back how the Korean War was fought out, and you had the Fn Fal fully production, every unit, was that still enough to hold an enemy human wave assault tactics? The Russians who had developed the AK-47 by then and distributed it around the Warsaw Pact, mainly for their own armies, then the puppet states. So the Fn Fal and the M14 with the 7.62 were totally long rifles, because that long range rifle cartridge need to have that long barrel. The problem was with the 7.62, it needed a long barrel like I said, but the weapons were not inadequate for close quarters combat, so as in city fighting, villages, thick forest, and later on in the Vietnam War, in jungle warfare. The Australians and the Americans were using M14 Fn Fals, and they saw how adequate that weapon was. The Fn Fal had not many medical issues with it, because they were not more using steel compared to the M14 with wool nut stock. They would swallow over time with many rain falling on the weapon, so the weapon is jamming a lot. Controllability, no. Only the Fn Fal has some controllability, but most of the countries will use only as a semi-automatic rifle. So the 280 was more controllable. Higher rate of fire was also more efficient, and the penetration was also even good with the 7.62, but it was a smaller diameter, so that you can carry more and you have more strongly rate of fire towards your enemy. So if the Americans have adopted the Fn Fal only shorter, or the EM2 for example in 280, maybe the Vietnam War would go differently. But even neutral countries were making a neutral pact, like India for example, the Middle East were also trying to stay neutral between the communist and the capitalist Cold War design. They were also using some AK-47s or the Fn Fal, because that was on the market back in those days. But during the Vietnam War, and especially around 1967, 1968, the Americans totally have removed the M14 from frontline service and given all the forces, Marine forces, airborne units, and the army the M16A1 with the 5.56 cartridge. The Air Force was the first adopting this rifle, and before that, when the first Marine forces landed on March 18, 1965 on Vietnam shore in the south, they were totally equipped with M14 rifles. Some were still equipped with carbines versions from World War II, because there were not enough in inventory for the whole unit. The only unit was fully equipped with the M14 was the 101st Airborne Division. So some units were still using M1 Garand weapons. But also for the main reason why the Americans did not adopt the Fn Fal is because that René Suttler said, if we have to fight the Russians in cold weather conditions, and they were especially looking at that the Cold War will start in Europe, that if the weapon must be has a gas port system the gas port system will drop during cold temperatures. The Fn Fal was not designed for. Fabrique Nationale readjust the system so they have machinery into the rifle to adapt different cartridges pressure and the gas regulator. So the long stow gas piston will be adjusted to the weather condition. The M14 didn't. So that was the main problem. The Belgians were not getting the chance to redesign the weapon back in those days, and eventually with politics in those days and even to this day dirty, and they decided it's a country proudness to develop their own weapon, because they want to have an M1 Garand version. 85% of the manufacturing was in capacity to make their own weapon. But unfortunately, less than that was developed. The Italians, for example, they made their MB59 M1 Garand version. It used more standard parts from the former M1 Garand version compared to the M14, and it was a little bit more shorter and had more gadget on it compared to the M14. I do not say that MB59 is more superior to the M14, but if you go to manufacturing capacity and you want to make a cheap weapon as possible for your own army, then the Italians make it. Cheap as possible, but chill, rugged as reliable, and you make reusing stock weapons that you have left over from World War. Before that, give it to your army in a new way. So the Italians, they nailed it, where the Americans unfortunately didn't. But I really said why we did go with the 7.62 instead of the 280. If the Russians would be attacked, they had the advantage of firepower with their AK-47 or later on the AK-74s. But there was no body armor, and in those days penetration was not really necessarily. So a smaller cartridge to wound it or kill your opponent was more efficient compared to now. So a 7.62 using today is more thinkable compared to 50 to 60 years ago. But many countries also did not really like the 7.62 and the long weight of the M14 and the Fn Fal or the G3 for example. They adapted those weapons because they want to upgrade their armies. There was no other option until the M16 came around. The Japanese Self-Defense Force, for example, they designed their own version, the Type 64, in 7.62 by 51. It was a really unpopular weapon apparently. I didn't know that because only someone in the comment section down below told me that. He is also a member of the JSDF, or he has friends in the JSDF. And I can understand why the Type 64 is a really unpopular weapon, because some mental breakdowns, but many countries have to deal with the weapon what they have. When the start of the NATO pact to compromise which of those two weapons will be adapted in Western NATO countries, and at the same time the Americans could use a modernized weapon in the Vietnam War. Weapons were short enough for compact warfare in jungle environments. So I think those weapons were better and more modernized compared to the M14. I'm not trying to ditch the M14, but it was just a really bad decision for the wrong time. Today in 2021, 7.62 is a good opportunity because that body armor is becoming more and more efficient and more strong compared to the 5.56. If you shoot in 5.56 to body armor, it will bounce off like tank armor. But like I said, the M14 was, the 7.62 cartridge was a wrong decision, a wrong choice from the time. In those days we needed a 280 cartridge or the 5.56 for example, but that was 10 years later. So NATO has to wait 20 to 25 years later when they finally realize, no, the 7.62 we're going to ditch it and make our own version in 5.56 caliber. Smaller countries like the Netherlands for example stuck with the Fn Fal in 7.62 all the way on the early 2000s. Was replaced by the C7 M16 version from Canada, and the rest of the countries they have their own weapons, but there are still standardization around the 5.56 and the M16 magazine. So I do hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know in the comment section down below. And for those people who live in India or in the Middle East for example, who has fought against certain conflicts during the Cold War, please let me know in the comment section down below what you think about the 7.62 and the Fn Fal it was used, or the M14 in those conflicts. And you think, was it better to use the 280 instead of the 7.62? In my opinion, the 280 was the most prominent and most effective cartridge, more advanced compared to the 7.62. So I do hope you enjoyed this video and see you all next time.